Hello, Facebook world. I'm Phoenix Rose. In case you didn't already know that, by now you've probably had some context of who I am. But this live is going to be about navigating death phases or ego death. And I call them death phases because these are phases in our life where everything that we love, we're attached to, begins to fall apart and crumble, and it can feel as though we want to die, and that many things in our life are dying. So I'm going to share a little bit about what they are, why they happen, and what we can do about these death phases, ego death, metaphysical death, however you want to phrase it for yourself. Dark day of the soul. I'm curious who here is familiar with a dark day of the soul. Tell me about it. When was your last dark day of the soul? What happened? What fell apart during that time? Maybe you're still in one. There's a collective experience of crumbling and reorientation happening right now. And for some of us, it can feel like death. So I actually took the name Phoenix Rose during a death phase that happened over my Saturn return some years ago. I am quite familiar with these cycles of death and rebirth, and I've had several significant phases of death, ego death, metaphysical death in my life. And during my Saturn return, everything crumbled. Let's see, I was living in this beautiful cabin in the woods in the mountains west of Boulder. I was doing ceremonial work. I had a healing practice. I was in a 2-year-long relationship. And one by one, these things began to fall apart. My relationship ended when my partner slept with a 20-year-old and formed a new relationship all of a sudden. I was too sick. I developed a lung sickness and I got progressively worse over a number of years. I was too sick to run my healing practice and had to find alternative sources of income. The alternative source of income I got was amazing. I was doing ceremonial facilitation work as an assistant, and that person fired me by telling her new employee that I no longer had a job. And so I'm too sick to work. I'm running out of money really fast. My relationship ended. I loved that relationship. I was somewhat addicted to it too. And I remember being so depressed and so sick. I had 5 to 10% of my life force energy available to me at the time. And I was looking out the windows of my beloved cabin, and I thought, as long as I still have this, everything is fine. A couple weeks later, I was evicted. And all of a sudden, all of these things that I was attached to and that I loved and that I had identified with were no longer in existence. And it was rough. It was so rough. So insert the name Phoenix Rose. There's a whole tale. Death phases always end in rebirth. They do. That's the cycle, death and rebirth. Planet Earth is a mystery school for death and rebirth. We see death and rebirth everywhere in nature, in the seasons, in the plant and animal life, in our newborns and our elderly. It is everywhere. It's one of the great lessons of this planet. And we go through it many times in a lifetime where an old part of us falls away and a new part takes place. So Phoenix, right, that mythological firebird that rises from the ashes time and time again, it was just what I was going through. I'm also a super fiery, passionate being, and Phoenix made sense. After that last Saturn return death phase, my birth name no longer resonated with me, but Phoenix did. And I was trying to sneak past the death phase by choosing the last name Rose. Rose is a play of my lineage of the Rose, Mary Magdalene's school, mystery schools. And at the same time, instead of being Phoenix rising, which meant that I would be in this rising cycle, I wanted to be beyond the rising, into the risen, to the rose. So I chose the name Phoenix Rose and have been walking in the world as her ever since. And Phoenix Rose was what was born from that last major death phase. So again, I would love to know about your death phases and the challenges of it, and also the healing gifts that you gained. Because while a death phase is death and includes, you might lose friends, loved ones, you might lose careers, you might lose beloved places where you live, you might lose your health, right? And you might lose all of those things at one time, which for me, when I have a major death phase, all of it crumbles, all of it. And in the last 2 years, actually, I've gone through another one. I had a 2-year pause between death phases before my next one began. And this death phase was worse. I thought that was the worst phase of my life. And at the time it was. The latest one was harder. It was so much harder. My body began to vibrate uncontrollably. Again, I lost a beloved relationship. We've since reunited, but we spent 10 months apart in one of the most horrific breakups of my life just because of how deeply I loved this man and was not ready to let him go. I had realized all of these dreams in 1 year, in 2020, and then in 2021, they all came crashing down. 3 of my longtime best friends walked out of my life with no explanation, unwilling to communicate about why. They were just gone. There one day, gone the next. A person that I knew and cared about was murdered in the Boulder grocery store shooting last year. And soon after, another community member was killed in a shooting in Colorado. I got COVID 3 times. I got strep and was the sickest I've ever been in my life. Half of my hair fell out. Let's see, what else happened? My beloved canine companion of the last 13 years passed away and I couldn't be there. I was slandered online for many, many months by a former client I let go from one of my programs. She was spreading false information to hundreds of people on the internet in an attempt to cut me down. And boy, did it cut. It hurts. I went to an event, an ISTA event, thinking that I was going to be really held and welcomed by my community. And I was cold-shouldered and cast out and turned away from and told that I was being a victim and weak and left alone in my grief. And it was hard. It was so hard. And my health continued to decline again with a different sickness this time. In the summer, last summer, I was diagnosed with Graves' disease. And so a lot of the symptoms of the shaking, the hair falling out, some of the volatile emotionality, all of these things can fit under that Graves' disease diagnosis. But this phase, this latest death phase, was the longest death cycle I have ever been through. And it's still not over. I've had breakthroughs. I've had a lot of integration, but it goes on and on and on. And there's more material, more things to process. So I just wanted to share my personal experience with death phases because I am very familiar with these, these years of life, both the challenges and the medicine that comes from it. Again, typically everything that we're identified with or attached to gets stripped away. And what's left is this usually raw, bleeding, pained version of ourselves, but it's the core of who we are. We get to find the core of who we are during these phases where everything that's not necessary is removed by God. There's super, super potent phases where there's lots of material and lessons and magic that can ensue from going through these experiences. Death phases. It has to die for something new to take form, to come into being. It has to die. It has to go away. And especially for those of us that are healers, that are on a soul mission, that are here to change the world, that might be connected to Christ consciousness and the expansion of Christ consciousness on the planet, right? Jesus had his whole life, was crucified on the cross, rose again. These death phases are a current alchemical process that is similar but different to what Jesus demonstrated on the planet, right? He was able to come back to life, to resurrect himself. He studied in mystery schools to be able to learn that craft, to show us that if we train, if we devote, if we study, if we receive the lessons and go through and have the integrations, that we can become more powerful, more connected to our divine powers, magic, masters of energy. And it's not easy when your whole life is falling apart. It's falling apart. I remember in the last couple of years, I felt as if a giant boulder was rolling down the mountain and just taking out my life as it rolled. And I wanted to stand at the bottom of the hill and stop it from its path of damage, but I couldn't. There was no stopping that. The momentum was happening. Abraham talks about, we just got to let it fall. We got to let it fall completely. My field fractured, it shattered, like a snake shedding its skin. That old skin had to peel away. And there's a new version. A new, more vulnerable, raw, tender, empathic, aware version of myself that is coming through. Discerning. There's a more discerning version coming through. So, death phases. What have you experienced? What have you gained? Right? I know what I'm gaining. One of the things I'm gaining from this current experience that I'm in, that I'm at the tail end of, is balance. Inner balance. Balance of yin and yang. Balance of my hormonal system. Balance of moving in life and receiving in life. This really beautiful dance of balance. And I'm not fully integrated yet. But I'm getting there and working on it. I have a whole biological issue that for me is just a representation of an energetic change that's occurring that hasn't settled in my system yet. It was awoken. Whenever we have a phase of coherence in our life, so those coherent phases are the phases where everything's synchronistic, we manifest like crazy, our desires are coming to fruition, right? We feel amazing. This is coherence. Every time that we have a phase of coherence, that high frequency vibrates new material in our system. It detoxes new material for our examination, excavation, and exploration. And it's important to do this, right? It's going deeper. It's cleaning out the system more because, again, as I talk about in Tantra, Kundalini rises from the base of the spine. And it is said that we reach enlightenment when the Kundalini travels all the way through the energy centers and they're clear and they're flowing. And the Kundalini reaches our third eye and we awaken, we are enlightened. But in order for that to happen, every distortion and karma and trauma in our system has to be purged, it has to be cleaned out, it has to be felt, experienced, and shed so that the energy can travel through an open and clear pathway. Death phases are doing that. They're squeezing us out. They're turning us inside out. They're bringing the shadow into light. And they are so, so, so important. So important. And they hurt. We can suffer for a long time. Even if we know what's happening, it can still really, really hurt. I still felt and feel really, really hurt. And that's part of our awakening. It's part of our coming to realization. It's part of our journey. It's part of our mastery and healing. This is teaching us to be master alchemists and master healers, because that's what you, especially if you're a rainbow warrior, are here for. We are the master alchemists. We are in training to become master alchemists. We are on that path of transformation, transfiguration, right? Alchemy. Death phases. Gosh, they're brutal. And, right, one of the things, how do we navigate these phases when they're happening? What I've experienced, especially in this last one, was all of the tools that worked before were no longer working. Nothing worked. I spent tens of thousands of dollars on healing and services and treatments, and it would last for an hour, maybe two, before I was right back where I was. And mind you, Graves' disease is a hormonal autoimmune disease imbalance. But for me, it's all energetic. There's something going on in my energy body that is creating these symptoms that needs to be integrated. It needs to be healed. It needs to have attention on it. And it is getting so much of my attention right now because this is my next level of healing mastery. And disease is often that. It's showing us something that's distorted or absorbed from collective consciousness. And we have an opportunity to transmute it. Alchemy. So I'm just in a very big healing opportunity right now, and it's more advanced than anything I've gone through yet in this lifetime. But it will happen. Integration will occur. Healing will abound in your life too. In your life too. So we get to look at the symbolism, the messages, the learnings that are packed into these experiences. And navigating death phases takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of strength. When you are feeling knocked down and kicked around by the universe, last year I felt like I had been knocked over by a wave, and I would stand up, on the sandy ocean floor, and another wave would come and take me out. And I was just in this like pummeling for almost 2 years, a year and a half of being pummeled constantly without able to find my ground. And now my ground is lasting longer and longer. There's more phases of ground, and the waves are still coming, but I've become a better surfer. They move me. You know, the willow tree has a little bit of wiggle. Trees don't always break in the wind because they're flexible. If we're too rigid, something's going to snap. So death phases are like that. You have to be resourceful. You have to be a little bit fluid. Again, if everything's getting stripped out of your life, all your old identities, your ways of feeling secure, the love in your life, if it's getting removed, you have to be resourceful in finding a new way. And you'll find it. During the peak, the pinnacle of this latest round of death in my life, where people actually died. Things that I loved actually died. An animal. She's not a thing, she's an animal. And it feels as if the friends who walked out of my life died because I don't talk to them anymore. They were there, they were my support system, and all of a sudden they were gone. So I've been grieving their deaths as well. And right in the pinnacle of it, I lost my train of thought. Went on a tangent and lost my train of thought, as will happen. In the pinnacle of this death phase, yeah, it's gone. Sometimes that happens. This is a good human moment. Human, right here. I don't have it all figured out. I have brain fog sometimes too. So what I'm here to show you is that we can lead even if we're struggling, even if we're suffering. I think it's really important to take time for nervous system regulation and healing, and to not give to others if our field is needing to receive, right? To really, really pay attention to when do we have an overflow and abundance of chi, and when do we need to take some time to replenish our supply. And so I took many months off. I completely reevaluated the way that I was operating within my business, the language I was using, who I was talking to, what I was about, because the thing that I was about previously was attacked, called out, named, attacked, turned away from. And I was so identified with that person, with that personality. And I had to really look at what's important here. What's important here? What do I need to know? Who am I really? And how can I emanate that truth at a deeper level? So I had to lead. I was in a round of Rainbow Warrior as all of this upheaval was happening, and I had to move through and hold this container together and make it to the end. And Rainbow Warrior is such a warrior path. It is such a warrior path. It's a warrior of love path. How deeply are we committed to the truth? How deeply are we committed to fulfilling our missions on the planet? How deeply are we committed to the planet and healing relationally and showing up for a devotional path, right? In order to achieve mastery, we have to commit. We have to practice. We have to have discipline. We get to play too, because again, balance is necessary, but those things are needed for mastery. They are. They're needed for mastery. Now, one of the gifts that was given to me is that I can walk with people through their dark times. I can work as a guide. I can hold your hand because I've been there. I'm not scared. I've seen the human mess. I've been the human mess. And no longer will I turn away from the human mess like those who turned away from mine. I'm not going to do that because I see how important that process is. Of course, I'm not going to run into abuse or violence, things of that nature. But when a human is crumbling, when they're feeling destroyed and fractured, I'm going to be right there checking in on them because that's what I needed. That's what I still need. And that's who I've become because of the death in my life. Yeah. So thank you for taking the time to watch with me. And again, I would love to hear your experiences with your own death phases and the healing gifts that they provided. And as you know, we're in open enrollment for Rainbow Warrior, but it's about to close. So if you are ready for that soul initiation to take your healing abilities to the next level, to show up in leadership and be a force of change on the planet, please apply. Please apply now because doors are closing soon. And I would really love to see you there. for that warrior path of healing and love. I'll see you soon, beloveds.